right, so today, discussing a little bit about youth ministry. I have a friend of mine, Chris Rivera, who's down in the Diocese of Orlando. So, Chris, what's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going? So, I'm Christopher Rivera. I'm the Diocesan Director for Youth and Young Adult Ministry here at the Diocese of Orlando. I have been doing youth ministry for over 16 years now, just crazy. Started off as a teenager in ministry, and I really found the call to go and share that Jesus loves every young person
Mm.
from a really young age at my first NCYC. And then from there, that's been the thread of my life, right? Making sure young people know that Jesus loves them, cares about them, and wants to have a defined, real relationship with them. And I do as much as I can to be able to help young people do that. And so that has led me to a point where I'm here now as the Diocesan Director for Youth and Young Adult Ministry here at the Diocese of Orlando.
Great, great. That was a good overview, bro. Like you jumped right in. I Chris and I have known each other for a number of years from different vantage points, right? Like first, like from kind of loose, like hearing names, seeing each other at certain events and distance, to working together here in New York City. And then now, continuing this relationship as he moved down to Orlando. So, I mean, I know you've talked a little bit about it, but I think like kind of the progress for yourself, how it was for you coming into youth ministry and then how, that's developed throughout the years. But what's something you see as just like some biggest challenges facing Catholic youth ministry right now?
I think some of the biggest challenges that are facing Catholic youth ministry right now is really engaging the young person where they're at. We talk a lot about, all right, we're going to be where young people are. We're going to
Hmm.
meet them where they're at and help them. And figuring out how to do that within the auspices of what our Catholic Church allows us to do, to be able to do that in a safe way that helps to, one, help build those relationships, but two, also provide our young people with a sense of an authentic self
Mm.
is really important. And so some of the challenges I would say is definitely one, being able to reach them where they're at in a way that feels safe and it follows all of our rules and protocols, right? And then two, the sense of being able to build that authentic relationship. And then three, really being able to serve their needs
Hmm.
out of the lens of our Catholic Church and out of our Catholic spaces. A lot of times when it comes to these challenges, what ends up happening is we have youth ministry. It's dedicated for an hour to 3 hours in a parish hall or in a youth center.
Hmm.
And it's typically allocated to just that space, just that time within the church setting. And then we always remember there's the paperwork that's got to get done and the pieces that have to be taken care of.
The fun
Right.
parts.
The fun part of ministry, right? And what happens? We realize in order to reach more kids, we need to go outside of the four walls of our church.
Mm.
Then we go, how do we get outside the four walls? All right, we've got to go too deep, right? We have to make sure we have myself and another adult who can go with me
Hmm.
out to the community. Now, in New York City, post COVID, all the school buildings are closed off to typical public,
Hmm.
right? If you were to be able to get in there, how do you do it? All right, you've got to make sure that you're cleared, the person you're going with is cleared, and then you have a reason to be in the building, and the event is open enough for you to be there. So then what
Mm.
happens? You have to prove a case as to why you, as the youth minister and volunteer in the local church, is able to get into the school setting, or that you and your volunteer are able to be at this baseball game
Mm.
and or other activity that young people are doing, being able to gain access to where young people are. Now you can say, well, we're in New York City, there's a mountain of different places we can go, but our young people choose where they want to be.
Hmm.
And then so we have to find our way, one, to get to where they're at, two, to be able to be authentic in that space, because guess what, 30 some odd year old Chris looks really awkward in a in a space with young people without having a reason to be there, right? And so really finding ways to uniquely engage young people where they're at, build authentic relationships with them. So that means engaging that young person we do have at the parish and inviting them and their friends to a space that's communally acceptable for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then that is creating one, the safe environment, two, the space where you can be authentic. You already have a built relationship, and now you're going out and expanding that relationship with others. And then three, being able to help our youth minister and young adult get outside the doors and the walls of our church. In all
Right.
those three ways, those are the challenges. And I kind of gave you some solutions, but really the difficulty of if we are only looking at ministry as a set of 1 to 3 hours,
Mm.
but there's all this other work that has to go in order to meet young people where they're at and then invite them into a relationship with Jesus Christ in the Eucharist.
Mm-hmm.
It requires you and I and all of the youth ministers to really reevaluate what the work week looks like,
Right.
reevaluate how we engage young people.
Right. 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 And if I could pause because you said a lot, right? And I want to kind of backtrack and then unpack that a little bit. So, um, there is what you said is like, and I want to start specifically with how our time is allotted and how we meet them where they are, right? Because I think you're talking about the strategic and the safe boundaries. I just say it that way, right? Where um, we are making sure that just everything is protected and safe. Like you said, with going with somebody with you, making sure that you're able to step into school spaces or community spaces, and proving that, you're not just some strange person walking in, but, you have a reason to be there. Um, but I think what we said is like building authentic relationships and rethinking about how that work week looks and how could that look, right? Like I think we talk about like, okay, we have them in our confirmation program. We might have them. A parish may have various programs themselves, but how are we reaching them beyond? Are there some like strategic practices you see or think? Because I mean, the challenge is figuring out where those spaces are and getting into those spaces. But what could be some like solutions, in that process?
I think some concrete solutions that our youth ministers can use in order to meet young people where they're at, in order to expound upon this work week, it's really threefold, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is engaging the young people that you have in your building,
Mm-hmm.
getting to build authentic relationships with them, getting to know where their faith journey is, how their faith life and their life outside of the church interact with one another.
Right.
Because those are unique. There are some times where we have young people who their image at church is different than their image outside the walls of the church. Right. So
That's
you want to be able to really engage them.
mm-hmm.
That I want to say is step one. Step two is while you're fully engaging them, realizing and actualizing this authentic relationship, you have to remember that in order to ask for the authentic, you need to provide the authentic.
Oh, that's good.
So then you as a youth minister, me as a youth minister, I cannot walk up in front of a young person and show them the church Chris
Mm-hmm.
and the outside Chris. Both Chris's need to be one, and I need to be authentically who I am. Because when we are not authentic, young people, especially now here in 2025 and beyond, guess what? They read authenticity, and they can read it clearly on a video like this and or in person, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they need to know that you are being fully authentic. They need to be able to develop those. And then from that relationship, then you can launch pad out to public spaces where they want you to be a part of their lives. And they want to invite you into the relationship with other friends and family and people that they want to be engaged with, right? And so with that, that's step one.
Mm-hmm.
Step two is making sure that as you are engaging in developing authentic relationships with these young people and the church, you invite your core team to come alongside you to go out of the doors. So to go
Right.
be where young people are, go hang out with them. You, instead of creating the event and inviting kids to come to the event, you say, what are the events that you find are important? Let We'd love to go.
Mm-hmm.
We love to support you with whatever matters to you, right? And then step three in that, in regards to the work week, is you establish your work week where you know what ministry looks like and you know when your typical ministry time functions. Have you ever evaluated your ministry time and said, how effective is the 32-week ministry cycle?
Straight. So can we pause there for a second? Because again, I want to slow that down because I think, all right, there's some words that we use in ministry all the time, like core team, right? There's also words of like, okay, you're saying engaging them and going into the community, but then you're also saying you have a strategic time where you are gathering, right? So that in itself is takes some prep work and right. So it's like, okay, this is on plan schedule. This is when we meet, right? Then it's, hey, we've gathered these adults, young adults, people that want to engage with young people, right? And then three, we need to then empower those people to then go and meet them in the community and not leave it to only that first bracket that we made, which was, setting up that a lot allocated time, which is that hour to 3 hours we were talking about in the beginning, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I
Yeah.
think uh, when breaking that down, I think what's important is, and the reason I established it first saying, I as a youth minister and my relationship with my young people
Mm-hmm.
is, if I don't have a defined relationship with the young people that I serve,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot share that relationship, that relational capital with any of my leaders or anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I can't teach you how to do it if I'm not living it. And so
Facts.
I think primary do it is we need to be who we are speaking. Excuse me. We need to be the person that we're speaking about with our young people and with our leaders,
Yeah.
right? We need to be
Authenticity.
authentically ourselves and then share that authentic self with others, right? So that's primary. Secondary to that is, as we're building these relationships with our young people, as we're building the relationships and training our team of volunteer leaders that we call sometimes in youth ministry our core team,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, as we're developing them, we want to train them in a methodology that says, be authentically yourself.
Right.
Share your authentic experience of who Jesus is, right? How you have found him in the church, in the Eucharist, but be willing to forego that part of the conversation at the onset to develop and understand who the person is that you are serving,
Mm-hmm.
and then invite them to understand the relationship that you have with Jesus, understand the relationship you have with the Catholic Church, right? Because those are nuanced.
Right.
So, one, building authentic relationships. Two, teaching and forming a group of adult leaders to go and have these authentic relationships that share faith, right? And then three, as we're doing this process, then and only after you develop the relational capital with the young people that you are serving within your community, do you go outside those doors and find new kids to engage with. And most of the time in our Catholic spaces, we are literally looking for the friend of a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And when we engage the friend of a friend, we find out that, hey, guess what? That kid was also baptized Catholic, but they just were doing it traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of outside of the faith for a little bit. And we get the amazing opportunity to invite them back. What does that look like in a work week? What does it look like to engage kids authentically throughout a work week? A possible solution, because every ministry, every parish is all different.
Right.
And so I can't necessarily prescribe this is the way you do it everywhere. But one model that can be used looks like this. On Sunday, we engage with our young people at Mass. I cannot tell you how critical it is as a youth minister to be present at Mass with your young people. Part two, that's where you're engaging not only just your young people, but you're engaging their families.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now part two on this is the rest of your work week. Maybe you have youth ministry and it happens, your typical youth ministry night happens on a Monday or maybe a Wednesday or maybe a Friday,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whatever the day is that meet, and I know that there are some ministries that meet on Sundays, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whatever your ministry day is, I want you to think about it as that's the day I plan, build, and move and make sure everything is to the highest caliber of together,
Mm-hmm.
fully complete, fully well rounded, and everything that you need is provided and taken care of. So that's one day out of your week that's fully just ministry. Now, Christopher, what happens? I have 3 ministry days. How do I maneuver? Well,
Mm-hmm.
all right, we want to make sure that we're building one day out of my week is built on all of my ministry activities, whatever it is. So let's say you have your Bible study on Monday, you have your middle school group on Wednesday, you have your high school group on Friday. Great. What's one day out of your week that you are devoting to creating all your curriculum, all of your ministry pieces? You're gathering all your items, you're making sure you have everything you need, you have your icebreakers taken care of, you know who's leading what, you know how everything's functioning. So that's one whole day out of your week.
Mm-hmm.
Next couple of days out of the week, there should be at least 3 of these where you are going outside of your doors
Mm-hmm.
and engaging young people where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that 8 hours of your day is outdoors? No, because our young people are in school for most of those hours in the day. So you want to go through for the sweet spot, right?
Right.
The time where young people are outside and you can be outside. Typically, that's around somewhere between 2 and 5 o'clock, right? Where you're going to be really out and engaging young people. Does that mean you only engage young people? No. Sometimes during that time, you're also engaging your adult volunteers. You're inviting them into spaces where they can be comfortable around young people,
Right.
right? So that might be going to a local cafe. That might be going to the local Mickey D's. That might be going to the local park and just doing a prayer walk. What would it look like if we walked around our communities and we prayed for the young people that we're serving?
Right.
So that's 3 days out of your week. So we talked about one day for ministry, specifically like your programmatic ministry.
Right.
Right, we're talking about 3 days where you're devoting specifically around 3 hours to meeting young people where they're at and praying for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then those morning times, right? That's really administration. That's where you do your typical paperwork. You're engaging with the stakeholders at the parish, right? So now we've got Sunday, our one day out of the week devoted to programmatic ministry, our 3 days devoted to making sure we're going out to out to the mission field, right? Out to our communities and serving the needs of your parish. And there's your 5-day work week.
Mm.
As a youth minister, we never work just 5 days, right? So on Saturday, you're probably doing a retreat, and on Sunday or another day out of the week, you're doing something else. But at the end of the day, ministry must be the lifeblood of what you're living.
Right.
If it's not,
And that goes back to the
you
authenticity
get
piece.
lost.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying, and I think it's really good and really strategic, especially for someone who works in full-time ministry, how to plan your week, and I think that's helpful. But I had this theory, and I know we've talked about it a little bit offline, about this thing I call the 5 M's of ministry. And what I hear you saying a lot, is actually the last of the 5. Like, it's the last of the 5 in name that I say, but to me I call it kind of the baseline, right? So what I call that is the mission territory. So it's knowing where your kids are, it's finding them, it's identifying with them, it's connecting them in that place, it's having even a sense, and we haven't touched on this yet, but sense of cultural relevance, and understanding, again, just how are you connecting with these young people in various different ways. But just to give them name, right? It's the message, the music, the members, the meeting space, and the mission territory, right? And you also talked about the members, and that's what we're talking about with our volunteer leaders, our core team, etc. Um, you also kind of named the meeting space, which may be that parish hall or wherever place that they're meeting throughout the week. But I think very uniquely how you're talking about how we're missioning and meeting kids where they are. How would you say, how can you identify some of those places, right? Like, because you said, okay, they're in school most of the day, and you name maybe meeting at a local cafe or McDonald's or something. But just in a way, if you could think of any strategy of like, where are kids at and how are we meeting them? Because the way I look at it is like, if ministry is a house, right? And if the roof is the message, is that the gospel of Jesus Christ that we're giving, if the walls on either side are the members and the music, where it's like, that's what's happening within this space, right? Sorry, not the members. It's the music and the meeting space, right? That's where everything is happening in. The members are the doorway that connects them in. The mission territory is kind of that foundation. It's the ground level of everything. And so I think sometimes we don't take enough time to identify those things. And if you have any like tips or ideas on what that could look like. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of times, because most youth ministers, most youth ministry teams, they're already walking into a house that was built.
That's good.
So when a house is built, it's a very nuanced thing, because it almost requires you to do a full lift of the house off of its foundation to reset the baseline,
That's good.
to reset the foundation. I don't know if anyone has ever done this with a house. I know in the city, I have yet to have ever had to reset the foundation of a home. But I've seen videos on it. And if you just think about lifting an entire structure in its in full setup without messing it up, to re-pour the concrete slab, that takes a lot of work. And so what we're talking about here isn't an overnight flip. Implementing your 5Ms, building your foundation is not an overnight change. It requires you and I to do some community assessments where we actually physically go out to our local community, see what the needs and the resources are, and what place our church stands at the forefront of it, right?
Right.
Is our church fulfilling the needs of the community?
Right.
What are those needs of the community? The way in which we go out to really meet kids where they are at requires you and I to assess the community and literally figure out, where are those young people? We know typically, right, historically, young people are found in parks, in local community centers, in local schools, and in local cafes and or McDonald's or other establishments in which they frequent and don't cost a ton of money, right? So in the past, I think you and I, we might have said movies, right? Or other locations, like maybe go ice skating or whatever, but those are nuanced trips and activities.
Right.
But if you're going to go be where kids are, meet them where they're at, build a foundational understanding of culture, understanding their culture, understanding and identifying the fact that their culture is different than my culture and different than your culture or any other adult leader's culture. That's paramount. So we're literally uprooting the house.
Right. So uprooting the house. And I think what you said about like assessing the needs of the community. And I think there's some other practical tips you can have, just as simply, like you said, in gathering your leaders, right? Simply asking people. You already have young people in your programs and things. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the programmatic aspect of what you said before, like thinking, okay, we're talking about Mary this week. Okay, we're talking about Eucharist. Okay, how are we going to go through our icebreakers? What videos are we going to show? What, all of that. How is the prayer, that moment of prayer going to look? How are we going to structure that? Are there any liturgical things? We think about that stuff, but it's like, okay, well, let's step out of the program for a minute, have a conversation with them as people and be like, hey, where are your friends? I mean, I recently heard this one where and it was a mom that was talking to me after a church event that goes, "Yeah, I don't know why my daughter and them they got kicked out because they like just hanging out at Target after school." And I'm like, "They just literally just went to Target to walk around?" "Yeah, they would just go to Target to walk around." I'm like, "Okay, that's it." Never would have thought that, but in having that then can give me some information about how I can go to various places, right? Or if there's a new like a crumble cookie place that opened up that they may be gathering, like that happened about a month or two ago. I noticed that I went to just get some cookies, and I noticed the whole line waiting outside was all teens, and I'm like, man, why don't you just come to crumble cookie and start a conversation to engage young people? Um, but yeah, that I think that's good what you're saying as a whole there.
I know. I think that's really good, and I think the main part of what we're looking at is how do we almost, if changing the metaphor a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we drive the car while building it at
Mm,
the same time?
right.
Like that's crazy, but that's what you and I are called to do every day,
Mm,
right? It's we literally drive the car when we notice that there is something that needs to be adjusted. We pull off to the side of the road, we make the adjustment.
mm,
Sometimes it's not as easy as tightening a bolt on your tires. Sometimes it requires you to take the car to the shop, right? Sometimes in ministry, we get to a point where we're doing ministry so much. We're doing the programs, we're doing the activities, all the things that build the house,
mm-hmm.
right? That we forget about the foundational components that are necessary to expound upon the work that we're already doing. Yes, it's great for you to engage 5 or 10 kids in your local community, and they're the youth that are found inside your church.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you might be blessed and have 100 kids in your community.
Mm-hmm.
You might be blessed to have 100 kids that are fully participating in ministry at the parish. My question to you is if you have 10, 20, or 100 young people at your parish, what part of the pie of all the youth that you can be serving in your community are you truly serving?
I mean, look, and this is me challenging people a little bit, maybe because that's just me. Is sometimes I think even when we give that excuse, maybe you have a lot in your religious ed program, maybe you have a lot in your community, but when I compare them to our local schools, right? It tends to be a small fraction of those schools, whether they are actual parochial Catholic schools, whether they are, private schools, whether they are public schools. If you, okay, I have 100 in my program, but then, okay, how many, just Google search, how many are at the high school down the street? Oh, there's 500 there. Okay, well, I only got a fifth that are engaged in some way, shape, or form. And evaluating how do we get the other ones, involved. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, with that, as I was maneuvering analogies here, and thank you for granting me the liberty to do so, right?
right.
The nuance of it is a lot of times we think about ministry as this structure and this house that's built. And once it's built, there's no reason for me to change and or knock down a wall here or maneuver something. Why? It's worked for 10, 20, 30, 40,
Mm,
60 years. Why should I change it?
right,
You
right.
know why? Because you've been meeting a niche community. And when we meet a niche community, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. It engages so many. But we forget all the other people who feel lost,
Mm,
lonely, separated. They don't have anything else to hold on to. What would it look like if we switched our view and we started to say, what kind of home can I create for individuals that is open and receptive? I think that home would look like a space that has culturally diverse music,
mm-hmm.
a space that has games that engage everybody, no matter what race, language, or space that they're coming from. I think it looks like a space that is uniquely identified as youth. So it doesn't look like this library of books behind me, right? But it might look like a space that has particular lighting that's welcoming for young people. It might look like a space that has adult leaders that look like our young people
Right.
that they're serving, right? So does that mean that they all look all spiffy and nice and they've got a dress shirt on? No, but they could.
Hmm.
They also might wear a normal t-shirt, a hoodie, right? A pair of jeans and some sneakers.
Right.
We want to, one, meet young people where they're at. So two, we need to make sure our house looks like a place that's welcoming for young people.
Right. Right.
How do I do that, Chris, in a parish hall? Lights, camera, action. Right?
Well, it's funny because what you're doing, and you're literally outlining exactly what I'm saying in the five M's. Is these are all small parts, right? Like, and maybe one of the things is identifying. Okay, what can we focus on for the next 6 months? What can we focus on for the next year? And maybe it's one of the five first, right? But if I can,
Yeah.
just because I want to steer back because I feel like one of the we were on kind of the mission thing for a little bit, and you did mention earlier in the conversation about how figuring out how to meet kids in these public spaces, right? Are there any clear ways of how to approach the collaboration with schools, community organizations, or other parishes or things so you can get to those young people in different ways? Do you have any kind of tips or ideas in that space?
Yeah, definitely. I think tips in regards to how to meet young people where they're at, building collaborations across with local schools, community centers, and locations where you can engage young people. I think first and foremost, you have to have a very clear vision, mission, and plan in regards to what you do in ministry.
Hmm.
That foundation needs to be solid. What you do, what you offer, and what you're willing to offer.
Hmm.
I think the biggest bit of advice that was ever given to me was when you go into these meetings, when you meet with local schools and or other businesses and engagement, you listen more than you speak.
Hmm.
It's told to me by a really good friend. His name's Greg Moore, and literally he goes, I was like, "What is the best piece of advice you can give me when walking into this conversation with the school?" He said, "Chris, you need to stop, look, listen." Right? Share what you're doing, share what you offer, and then stop, look, and listen.
Hmm.
Look for what the needs are in the school or community space. Listen to what the individual you are speaking to has to say and how what their true needs are. Because sometimes they might say, well, we'd love for our kids to have a birthday party, right? So why don't we do birthday party events at the school? And your brain as a youth minister would be like, why in the world would I ever put together a birthday party
Hmm.
activity? There is an organization in New York City that literally goes throughout the middle schools and elementary schools and just hosts birthday parties for young people.
That's actually really good. That's really good.
And I think that is like one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. And I thought it was weird the first time I heard about it. And then when I realized that that was the place where all of a sudden we can show up as church
Right.
in the lives of a young person who might not have a birthday party of their own at home.
Yep. I mean,
Anywhere I would never even think about it.
I can share. I can mean, I have personal stories of kids that just as simple as at the end of the youth night getting them a cake, and I can even think of one. There was a girl that McDonald's loved McChickens, and we just got some McChickens and put birthday candles in it, right? And it was like her own family didn't do that for her, and she had this like whole moment, and it created this relational equity like we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That then provided an opportunity for her. It's not just a relationship with us, but a relationship with Christ, through that connection that we're able to create in that space. So,
Very true. And we're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus, right? In the world. How
amen.
better to do that than to fulfill the needs of your community? And that's why I bring it back to when you are trying to look for how to engage young people, you need to do a community assessment. If you don't know what a community assessment is, look it up online,
Mm,
right? But it literally involves you going through your community or taking a Google map, right? And mapping out what is available in your community,
mm,
what is missing in your community, and then evaluate what type of gifts that you as a church, you as a ministry have to provide to that community. And you might find that you have artistic ability and you want to do a mural for the community because there's no art in the community.
mm,
There's a friend of mine on the Lower East Side. He literally has been contracted to go from school to school, space to space, and renovate the space by creating art that has meaning in the community.
mm,
Right? There's so many different ways you can go about it. But the first part is really assessing the needs of the community and seeing how your ministry can be a asset to the community.
mm,
And then going to be that asset in the community by having these conversations with local schools and other locations throughout the community, whether it's a community center, right? So you have access. Does that mean we're going to talk about Jesus or we're going to be talking about faith while we're in those spaces? It all depends on what's available and what's allotted to us. Do
right.
you have to speak about Jesus in order to share your faith? No,
Mm,
right? There is a saint whose name is escaping me right now. I want to say it's Saint Francis of Assisi, but I might be wrong, right? Who said, "Preach the gospel always. Use words only when necessary."
no, that is definitely St. Francis, and I think uh we need to use words, right? We need to make it clear that's where we stand, but that doesn't need to be every second of the day. That could be just being the smiling face for a moment. That could be just wishing a happy birthday. That could be just playing basketball for a moment. And then using that so that when there is the opportunity, right? Because now there is some relationship, you can be like, well, why, man, why is this person so kind? Why is this person so loving? Why is this person so invested into my life and seeing me grow? And why are they want me to be a leader? Why are they creating these opportunities for me? Oh, it's because of this relationship with Jesus they have, right? And you're able to share that after those moments, like of what you said.
Yep.
Um,
And then once that foundation is built, the rest of the house comes up easy,
mm,
right? Once that foundation is reset, it is that much easier for you to shift walls around in the house. It's a lot more easier for you to create the environment to help support the team of individuals that are coming around, like those members of your community
mm,
who you are then going to pour into and help them reach more young people, help them engage the kids in the proper way. I think back to I want to say maybe a year or two ago when we were building uh, in our ministry night, we had the setup where we would do there was a meal, there was an activity, there was a talk, and then there were more activities and hangouts and conversations,
mm,
right? And as we were going through that, I was trying to figure out, well, how do we do this in a way that it's more systemic? Because Chris Rivera's brain is very systemic, right? I go process A, B, C. And so I divided the room into location A, B, and C, right? And so when you walked into the space, you were welcomed with food and the engagements and the activities. And then when we wanted you to move to the next space, we actually transitioned to a physical new space,
mm,
right? Where we would do those like, opening activities, think about like icebreakers and games, and you have music playing, right? And then when we were going to the talk, we would then move over to a new space
mm,
with the talk. And I know normally we don't always have the liberty to change up the space, but you can change the configuration in the room
right.
to showcase the particular nuances to what you're going to do next, right? When I had smaller spaces, we'd welcome everybody, then we'd move the room into a circle. Then we'd take it from the circle into a sort of stadium style. Then we'd open back up into circle. Then we'd break into small groups. There's so many ways in which you can build the house. But if you don't have the proper foundation, guess what? The house is going to fall down at some point.
Right.
And so the reality for you and for me is we need to build the relational capital. We need to build the relational foundation. We need to invite young people into a relationship with Jesus and relationship with our church and the Eucharist. Those are paramount, and they sit at the forefront of what we do. I think back to the document Listen, Teach, Send that invites us into this Emmaus journey, right? Where Jesus listens first. You and me as youth ministers were called to listen first, to earn the right to be heard. Once we earn the right to be heard, then we're called to teach, and teach the faith in its fullness with love. And then a lot of our ministry lives in that teaching space, right? It lives in that relational teaching space. And after we break bread as Jesus did, then what do? We send those young people out to go be the hands and feet of Jesus in their community. We can only do that if we build the proper relationships with our young people and empower them with enough tools that they can go out and share the faith that they have with others. Right? And so as they're building that foundation, as they're building that house, we know that the house can be changed every so often, right? As we're driving down the road, there are things that need to be tweaked. How do we tweak them? What's the kind of methodology, if you would, to being able to do that? I would honestly say that take your 31, 32-week program and throw that poor thing out the window. I'm sorry, but the days of the model where you just run it all throughout 1 year and it's one seamless thing, that cannot function well without reevaluation that happens throughout the year. Does that mean you don't need the calendar that your pastor has asked you for? No, you do need the calendar. You do need the overview. Christopher Rivera typically does a calendar for 3 years. And then I reevaluate throughout. But every 4 to 6 weeks, you should have a pause built into your ministry in which you can reevaluate and see, well, what rooms need to be changed? What items need to be added? What things need to be taken away from ministry? So that way your ministry is relevant to young people, serves the needs of young people, and is able to really be that beacon of hope for your community. Because when we do that, when we follow the 5 M's, what happens is you built the house, you have doors that function, you have a space that's welcoming, and you create the proper setup so that way you can let Jesus do the work that he's got to do. Because he's only invited you and me as youth ministers. We're not the people who are going to save the lives of these young people. Jesus has already done the work.
Amen.
Jesus is already continuing to do the work. It is our opportunity to bring young people. It's our responsibility to bring young people to the foot of the cross.
Hey man, I can't think of a better way to end that. We could go on forever. I'm just saying, there's a couple things you said there that I'm like, ooh, we can go into this rabbit hole. We can go into this rabbit hole. But I think as an initial conversation, as you know, at least an initial public conversation, because we've had some behind the scenes ones. Yeah, we this will be helpful. I think. I pray it's helpful for someone who stumbles onto this video that is thinking like, what is the next steps? Where am I hitting a wall? How can I develop and grow? Knowing that the ultimate goal is not to get them to us or to our program, but to get them to Christ. And all these things are processes and just strategies, etc., etc. And yeah, I think with a focus specifically of that foundation and that mission of how we engage young people where they are. So, thanks, Chris. And
thank you very much for having me.
God bless.
God bless you. Peace.